A sex offender serving time in the United States, convicted of having 2/3 sexually explicit images of children on his computers, might be on his way to Canada. A child sex offender serving time in an American prison for his disgusting crimes, a creep who hasn't lived a day in Canada in over 20 years, might be on his way back to Canada to serve out the rest of his sentence, which means he'll be a completely free man if that happens. Look at this in the CBC from just a couple of days ago. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair must decide this week whether to allow a Canadian man serving a sentence for child pornography in the U.S. to transfer back to Canada, a move that would see him released immediately from custody and shave 2 years off his time behind bars. If Blair grants the transfer, he'll override a decision made by his predecessor, Ralph Goodale. In a May 28 ruling, the federal court gave the federal government 90 days to reconsider Goodale's decision to block Robert Scheiring's return to Canada on the grounds that he poses a threat to public safety and that he had abandoned his ties to Canada. Scheiring, whose hometown is Winnipeg, moved to the U.S. in 2000 with his wife and 3 daughters for an employment opportunity. In 2010, he pleaded guilty to possessing and distributing child pornography after police discovered 640,000 images and 2,500 videos of children in sexually explicit poses. Scheiring was sentenced to 14 years behind bars. He's scheduled to be released in the U.S. in August 2020 after his prison term was reduced to reflect pre-conviction custody and good behavior. The maximum sentence for the equivalent crime in Canada is 10 years. Canada does not enforce foreign sentences that exceed the maximum domestic sentence, which means that if Scheiring is transferred to Canada, he'll be released into the community immediately with no supervision. He would, however, have a criminal record and be required to register as a sex offender. Scheiring was in possession of and distributing 2/3 images of some of the worst, if not the very worst, forms of child abuse where the victims actually remain alive. Let that sink in for a second. Now, I dug into some of the American coverage of Scheiring's case to get a grasp of the full story. Scheiring, back in 2010, because he was technically speaking a non-violent offender, not the producer of these extreme child abuse crime scene photos, but rather the consumer and distributor who drove the demand for them, was out on bail before his trial. But what he had on his computer was so evil, so vile, so gut-wrenching that once prosecutors saw it, they demanded a change in the custodial arrangement of Scheiring, and they got it. Look at this from a Fargo newspaper at the time. Scheiring had been living at his Fargo home under electronic monitoring since his arrest in May, but prosecutors said they decided to ask for detention after viewing the evidence. At a hearing Friday on that request, U.S. Magistrate Judge Karen Klein called the halfway house where they agreed to send Scheiring an appropriate solution to a very difficult situation and said she was worried about Scheiring living at home with his family. He had 3 children. He had 3 children, people. Now, after initially pleading not guilty, Scheiring admitted to his crimes. I mean, he had to. The investigators found the evidence on his computers, including his work computer, as in his compulsions were so great and so strong that they followed him to his job. Now, that was 10 years ago in North Dakota. Scheiring was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Now, Scheiring has also fought any attempt to provide any form of restitution to the victims of his crimes, whose abuse he fueled with his sick compulsions and whose agony he peddled around the world to his sicko friends. Scheiring has once lost an appeal in the United States for a reduced sentence. He argued then that serving 14 years for possessing and distributing 640,000 images and 2,500 videos of children in sexually explicit poses was, quote, excessive. There's yet another reason, though, that Scheiring wants to come back home, besides getting out 2 years early, because Canada as a country does not take his sort of heinous crimes seriously enough, and getting around an American court that rejected his appeals for leniency. If Scheiring remains in the States, he will be on supervision for the rest of his life, the way child sex offenders should be. Just look at this. He will be on supervised release for the rest of his life after his prison term. But that supervision condition disappears if Scheiring comes back to Canada. He will be completely free. So Scheiring is now trying the Omar Khadr route to freedom. Just pretend to have some sort of ties to Canada and get into our lenient legal system and then be free despite one's evil deeds. Do you think for a second the government that paid convicted Al-Qaeda war criminal and murderer Omar Khadr $10.5 million for one too many sleepless nights in Gitmo would not repatriate this utter lowlife to allow him to walk free amongst us? Well, I wanted answers, so I sent a letter to Public Safety Minister Bill Blair to find out exactly what's going on with Scheiring. Now, here's the email I sent them yesterday morning. My name is Sheila Gunn Reid, and I'm an Alberta-based reporter for Rebel News. I'm working on a story about the end of the 90-day timeline for the minister to make a decision to repatriate Canadian citizen Robert Scheiring. Story here, and then I linked back to CBC's coverage that I read to you earlier, just so everybody's clear what I'm talking about here. I also wrote that the clock ran out on Wednesday, August 26, 2020. Could the ministry clarify? Has the minister decided to bring Scheiring back to Canada? If Scheiring is coming back to Canada, when will that happen? Has it happened already? If Scheiring is coming back, what reasons were given for that decision? If Scheiring is coming back, where is he going to live, and what steps, if any, are being made to alert the community where he will live? Thank you in advance for your time in answering these questions. My deadline is 11 Eastern Standard Time, September 2nd, 2020. Sincerely, of course, me. Well, my generous deadline with the ministry came and went as quietly as the deadline to decide to bring home Robert Scheiring. And you know what the ministry told me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They didn't respond at all, even though the ministry handsomely pays media relations people to answer questions from the media on matters of public safety. The public safety minister, Bill Blair, may not like me or the company that I work for, but his job is public safety. And it's in the interest of public safety, the safety of Canadian children, to know if the minister has agreed to bring home a sex offender to unlimited freedom within our borders. Scheiring could already be here. He could be anywhere. Why won't the public safety ministry just say something, confirm or deny? I'm going to stay on this case, and I encourage you to do the same. Call your MPs. Call the public safety minister. Tell these people to leave Robert Scheiring in an American prison as long as possible to protect Canadian kids. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. At Rebel News, we'll never sell our independence for a little bit of Trudeau cash like the mainstream media does. Now, that comes with a little hitch because it means we rely on the support of viewers like you at home. If you'd like to help support our independent journalism, please go to helprebelnews.com.